Well, when the riots broke out, they sent me out into the streets of LA, and what was going through my mind was it was really, really scary. There was one point when I was standing in front of some sort of an auto parts store, and it was being looted. And the photographer and I stood there as people started to get things out of the store. We're talking about kids and women and people of all different colors were grabbing things out of the stores and literally fighting with each other. People were grabbing things and someone else would grab it and they would fight with each other over who would get to take this article. And it was something that was so freaky to me. I'd never seen anything like that before. Just people behaving in that way. It was really, really frightening. I wasn't sure if they were going to turn on me. And then at one point they sent us down to Long Beach. And we were, again, seeing all kinds of stores being looted. And my photographer, Dolores Lopez, and I, at one point, heard gunshots, and it sounded like they were coming our way. And again, it was just a lot of sheer fear and terror. And I hit the floor of the news van, and she did too. And somehow, while on the floor of the news van, we managed to drive out of that neighborhood. But it was really, really scary, and at one point we both felt like we were in a lot of danger.
The riot coverage was a little bit different to us because we don't know the scope of it, how big, how large it was. It was so quick, and the severity of the event was so big that it was beyond our imagination. You know, we couldn't expect anything. When will this be over? Is this going to be just overnight or 1 or 2 day story, or is it going to be, you know, for a while? You know, it was a very confusing and chaotic situation because we didn't have any place to lean on. Source of information was what we were getting from out there, not from police or not from fire or any other sources. I think the Korean newspapers or stations covered the story in Korean American perspective, mostly, because that's what community, local radio station and newspaper are all about, you know, take care of the community. Also, you know, black or Hispanic, Latino newspapers, I think it was similar because each side had to, you know, cover what my readers or my listeners are in concern. So in a sense, all of, you know, three ethnic media had their own roles, yet I think we lacked a little to cover and look inside their community and, you know, and the other community, you know, cross each other.
I was not only terrified, but it brought back a lot of emotions and a lot of memories. As a young girl growing up in Detroit, I experienced the 1967 riots in my city at that time, and our own family was impacted because we thought we had moved away in an area where we didn't have to, I shouldn't say worry, but we didn't expect the violence to reach as far as it did, and it did one night. And I remember my father telling us to go to sleep on the floor in the living room, and we turned all the lights off because there were people riding down our cul-de-sac with stolen goods, and there was a National Guard following them, and it was just, I thought it was World War III. And I thought to myself, oh no, this is happening again, and I don't think these people really realize what they're doing or actually what can transpire from all of this. And I just kept playing that over and over and over in my head, but this was a very, very different juncture in my life. I was a news professional sitting behind a camera, and I had to relay information to the public in a very responsible and calm way, which I would say it presented some difficulty, but I made sure I got through it. But you can just imagine, you know, trying to be as serious and credible as possible, knowing some of the ramifications that could follow, and they did. Now, to answer that question, I mean, there were those particular groups involved. There was a lot of tension in the African American community because it was more African American residents in South Central and South LA and the areas where the riots erupted than Latinos at the time. However, there was a convergence. Many Latinos were moving into the area at a higher rate, I would say, but certainly less than what we see more now as we fast forward 20 years later. That area is primarily Latino, which at the time of the riots, I believe the numbers were reversed. In terms of the Korean community, there were a lot of tensions because of the people that owned stores, and the culture was very different. I think there was a misunderstanding on the part of both groups, especially on the part of African Americans understanding Korean culture. Of course, something the Korean community, we remember images and pictures of them trying to protect themselves because the police weren't around. The police weren't answering the call, so they felt they had to arm themselves. So just to juxtaposition pictures of a lot of Korean business owners on the roofs, actually almost like SWAT teams, trying to make sure that their businesses weren't burned or looted further, because some of them was just one picture. And as far as that story being told, I'm not exactly sure if it was 100%, simply because it was difficult to get to the area and to get people to talk. And again, there was really public safety at that time was not as effective as it could have been. So I think their story was not brought to the forefront as much as it probably could have. The Latino community, I mean, Latinos and African Americans were involved as well. If you look at a lot of the pictures in terms of being involved in the uprising, in terms of looting stores, was both very prevalent. However, at one point, the flashpoint at Normandy and Florence, we actually saw a Hispanic gentleman, Fernando Lopez, I believe that was his name, actually being beaten by an angry group of African American young men. And I think they were targeting, from what we understand, just anybody who wasn't African American at the time. And then they targeted them as well, because all of these groups were involved, and I think everybody, I don't think anyone really was without being harmed in some way. I mean, each had representatives of their own communities that were hurt, that were injured. So I don't think, in terms of taking these communities separately, is necessarily the issue. I think everyone had maybe a point of view to get across, but at the same time, I truly think that if the stories were told separately, there should have been a way to tie all of them together in some way. Because as you look at it now, 20 years later, especially Koreatown, there are a lot of different ethnicities that live in Koreatown. The Koreans, African Americans, Latinos, whites, and everybody seems to get along as best they can, certainly much more than they did 20 years ago. Because I think now people want to see jobs. They want to see crime go down in their areas, but they also want to see jobs. But because there is more of a cultural mix, even though there are a lot of communities that are still, and I don't want to use the word separate, but they are, where some ethnic groups will populate a certain area, another ethnic group will populate another one, but at least at this point it seems like they've been able to coexist a lot better. And of course, because of the law enforcement, the police force is also very much different than it was 20 years ago. It is as diverse as the people that it serves in the city of Los Angeles, and that seems to be working a little better. But I think, again, in the long run, people have come to understand, well, you know, we've got to have jobs, education, have to keep children safe, and provide better services for them, and make sure that as parents they are overseeing their children, their welfare, and what they're doing, so they can move forward in society.